I told you not to call me here. I can't talk right now. I'll call you back later.
The contractions were 4 minutes apart when Solange Adai's Bridges reached across the hospital bed and found nothing but empty air where Damon's hand was supposed to be. She turned her head, sweat-drenched and breathing through pain that felt like her body was splitting in two, and saw him standing near the window with his phone pressed to his ear, his back to her, his shoulders hunched in the way they always hunched when he was trying to have a conversation she was not supposed to hear. "Damon," she managed between breaths. "Damon, I need you." He held up one finger without turning around, the universal signal for wait, as if labor waited for convenient moments, as if the child forcing its way into the world cared about whoever was on the other end of his phone. 3 hours later, when Solange woke up from the exhausted half-sleep of a woman who had just delivered a baby alone with only nurses and a midwife for support, Damon was gone. Not stepped out for coffee, gone. Not grabbing food from the cafeteria, gone. His jacket was gone. His overnight bag was gone. The chair he had been sitting in was pushed back against the wall at an angle that suggested he had left in a hurry, and on the bedside table, weighed down by her empty water cup, was a folded piece of paper. Solange picked it up with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her body was still trembling from the delivery, and somewhere down the hall in the newborn nursery, her daughter was sleeping in a bassinet, brand new and perfect, and completely unaware that her father had just walked out on both of them. The note was short, 7 sentences. As Damon had written, in the careful block letters he always used when he wanted something to seem final, that he was not ready for this. That fatherhood was not something he had truly signed up for. That he was sorry, that he cared about Solange, but that he had been feeling trapped for months, and the baby's arrival had made him realize he needed to be honest about the fact that he could not do this life. He had signed it with just his first name, no love, no endearment, as if 7 years of relationship and 9 months of pregnancy deserved nothing more than a signature. Solange read it twice. Then she folded it back up, placed it under the water cup exactly where she had found it, and pressed the button to call the nurse. When the nurse came in, Solange asked if she could see her daughter. She was not going to fall apart in a hospital room with fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. She was not going to give Damon the dignity of her breakdown. She was going to hold her baby, and she was going to figure out what came next, and she was going to survive this the way she had survived everything else in her 31 years of life. Her daughter was 6 pounds, 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her mother's wide, serious eyes. Solange held her and felt the world reorganize itself around this new gravity. "Your name is Naomi," Solange whispered, "and we are going to be just fine." Now, if you are already feeling this story in your chest, if you know what it is to be left when you needed someone most, then stop right now and do something important for me. Hit that subscribe button. Here is a truth most people scroll past without thinking about. Over 70% of the people watching Philly Folktales right now have never subscribed to this channel. You feel every story, you carry the characters with you, you come back again and again, but you have not joined the community yet. Do not let today be another one of those days. Subscribe right now, smash that like button, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Atlanta, New York, Chicago, Manchester, Lagos, Accra. Wherever you are in this world, I want to know you are here. Because what Solange builds in the next 7 years, and what happens the day Damon sees her again, is the kind of story that reminds you why you never count a determined woman out. Solange had grown up in Louisville, Kentucky, the middle child of 3, raised by a mother named Celestine, who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry and still managed to have dinner on the table by 7 most evenings. Her father had left when Solange was 9, not dramatically, not in a single terrible night, but slowly, the way fog disappears, until one morning he simply was not there anymore. And Celestine had explained that sometimes people choose themselves over their families, and that this was his failure, not theirs. Solange had carried that lesson like a stone in her pocket for 22 years. She had built her life carefully, chosen deliberately, trying to avoid the specific kind of pain her mother had navigated. She had gone to college at Kentucky State on a partial scholarship, working part-time to cover the rest. She had studied business administration because she wanted the kind of knowledge that translated directly into security. She had been deliberate about her relationships, careful, watchful for signs of the same restlessness that had taken her father. And then she had met Damon Bridges at a mutual friend's birthday party, and he had been so charming, so attentive, so completely certain about her that she had let her guard down for the first time in her adult life. Damon was handsome in a quiet way, not flashy, but with the kind of steady good looks that improved with familiarity. He was an IT project manager, responsible and employed, and he had pursued Solange with a consistency that felt like safety. They dated for 2 years before moving in together, and for another 5 years they built what Solange believed was a shared life. To dinners and trips and the ordinary intimacy of knowing someone's habits and preferences and the particular way they laughed at their own jokes. She had believed in them. She had believed in him. The pregnancy was not planned, but it was not unwelcome, at least not to Solange. When she told Damon, he had smiled and said all the right things, had held her hand and talked about getting a bigger apartment and setting up a nursery. But looking back now, from the cold clarity of a hospital room where his absence was the most present thing in it, Solange recognized that his smile had not reached his eyes, that his hand had been still rather than squeezing hers, that his words had been correct but hollow. She had seen it and chosen not to see it, because she had wanted it to be real. Her mother, Celestine, drove up from Louisville the day after Naomi was born. She arrived with a suitcase and a casserole and the kind of fierce, quiet competence that Solange had watched her deploy against every crisis of their childhood. She read Damon's note without expression, set it back under the water cup, and then sat in the chair beside Solange's bed and took both her daughter's hands in hers. "You are going to be angry," Celestine said. "You should be angry, but do not let the anger make you small. You hear me? You stay big. For that baby and for yourself." "I do not even know where to start," Solange said. "You start with what is in front of you. Right now, that is learning to breastfeed and figuring out how to sleep when the baby sleeps. Next week, that is contacting a lawyer about child support. The week after that, something else. Hanu, you do not have to figure out the whole road tonight. You just have to take the next step." Celestine stayed for 3 weeks. During that time, Solange filed for child support, contacted a legal aid organization that helped her navigate the paperwork, and began the slow, exhausting work of figuring out how to be a single parent on a salary that had been designed to cover half of two people's expenses, rather than all of one person's expenses, plus a child. Damon did not contest the child support. He did not fight for visitation. He sent the required payments, never more than the minimum. And he did not call to ask about Naomi, did not send cards or gifts, did not show up. He had exited completely, the way her father had exited, the way some men apparently decided was easier than staying. Solange moved back to Louisville when Naomi was 4 months old. She could not afford Atlanta on her own, not with childcare costs that exceeded her rent, not without the support system she needed. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 6 blocks from her mother's house, found a job as an office manager at a small accounting firm, enrolled Naomi in a daycare run by a woman from their church, and began the grinding, unglamorous work of survival. The first year was the hardest. There were nights when Naomi would not stop crying, and Solange sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub, both of them crying together, utterly exhausted, and wondered how she was going to do this for 18 more years. There were mornings when she drove to work with spit up on her jacket because she had not had time to change, and sat at her desk barely functional because she had slept in 3-hour increments for the past 2 weeks. There were moments of loneliness so profound they felt like a physical weight, but there were also other moments. Naomi's first real smile, which happened when she was 6 weeks old and was probably just gas, but felt like sunrise. The first time Naomi reached up and grabbed Solange's finger with her whole tiny fist. The first word, which was "Mama," and which Solange cried over for 20 minutes straight. Naomi was extraordinary, not in the hyperbolic way all parents think their children are extraordinary, but in a real, observable way that other people noticed and commented on. She was bright and curious and laughed easily and had opinions about everything from an early age. She was the kind of child who made her presence known not through tantrums, but through sheer force of personality. walking into rooms and filling them with energy. By the time Naomi was 2, Solange had found her footing. Not comfort exactly, but a rhythm. She knew how this life worked now, had made her peace with the limitations and found joy in the richness. She had friends, women from the daycare and the church and the accounting firm, who showed up for her and for Naomi in small ways that accumulated into something substantial. She also started thinking about her future in a way that went beyond mere survival. The accounting firm had offered her a promotion to senior office manager, which came with a small raise. Solange accepted it and began taking online courses at night after Naomi was in bed, working toward a certificate in business management. It was slow, adding courses 1 or 2 at a time around her work and parenting schedule, but she was building something. By the time Naomi was 3, Solange had finished the certificate and was promoted again, this time to operations coordinator. The role came with significantly better pay and exposed her to the business planning and financial management side of the firm. She was good at it, possessed of the kind of organizational mind that could hold multiple systems and timelines simultaneously without losing track of any of them. By the time Naomi was 4, Solange had saved enough money to start thinking about something she had been quietly considering for 2 years, a business of her own. The idea had come from Naomi, indirectly. Watching her daughter navigate the world as a black girl in Louisville, Solange had become increasingly aware of the lack of quality natural hair care options for children. The salon near their house was run by a lovely woman who was talented with adult hair but uncomfortable with the squirminess and sensitivity of small children. The 2 places that specifically advertised children's services were mediocre at best and made Naomi cry at worst. Every wash day at home was a negotiation that required snacks, streaming cartoons, and significant maternal patience. Solange had started doing extensive research into natural hair care products, techniques, and the economics of salon ownership. She had attended a small business development workshop offered by the local SBDC. She had talked to her boss, one who had 30 years of business experience and was willing to mentor her about what it took to go from idea to operation. By the time Naomi was 5, Solange had a business plan. By the time Naomi was 5.5, she had secured a small business loan through a community development financial institution that specialized in minority women entrepreneurs. And 6 months before Naomi's 6th birthday, Solange Adaze Bridges opened the doors of Nourished Roots Natural Hair Studio, a child-friendly salon in a neighborhood shopping center that specialized in natural hair care for Black children and their families. The salon was beautiful. She had designed it herself, with bright colors and child-height mirrors and a play corner with books about Black history and culture, while parents waited. She had hired 2 stylists, both experienced with natural hair, both genuinely good with children. She had developed partnerships with 3 local schools and a pediatric practice whose patients' parents had been asking about gentle hair care options. Nourished Roots opened on a Saturday morning with a line out the door and did not slow down. The first year of the salon exceeded every projection in Solange's business plan, which she had written conservatively because her mentor had told her that optimistic projections were how new businesses failed. She had built in 18 months to break even. She broke even in 8. By month 12, she had paid off 20% of her startup loan early and was generating enough profit to hire a 3rd stylist and extend their weekend hours. The success was not accidental. Solange ran the business with the same disciplined attention she brought to everything, watching costs, tracking client retention, gathering feedback systematically, and acting on it. She invested in a booking system that made scheduling seamless and sent automated reminder texts. She created a loyalty program that rewarded families who referred new clients. She hosted free community events, a workshop on protective styling for school-age girls, a panel discussion on embracing natural hair in professional settings, a cultural celebration event in February that brought in the community and generated significant local press coverage. The press coverage led to something unexpected. A local business journal ran a feature story on Nourished Roots, profiling Solange as an example of successful minority woman entrepreneurship in Louisville. The story included a photo of Solange in the salon, Naomi in a styling chair beside her, both of them laughing at something off camera. The article was shared widely on social media. It generated new clients and a flood of supportive messages. It also attracted the attention of a regional small business development organization that ran an annual competition for emerging entrepreneurs in the tri-state area of Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. A representative called Solange and asked if she would consider applying. The competition offered a $50,000 grant to the winner, mentorship from an advisory board of experienced business leaders, and the kind of regional exposure that could accelerate a business's growth substantially. The application process was competitive and comprehensive, requiring a detailed business plan update, our financial projections, a video pitch, and multiple rounds of evaluation. Solange applied. She worked on the application during Naomi's bedtime hours, after the salon closed, on Sunday mornings while Naomi watched cartoons. She refined her business plan. She practiced her pitch. She gathered every piece of financial documentation the competition required and organized it into the kind of clear, professional presentation that communicated she took this seriously. Celestine helped with Naomi during the final intense weeks of preparation. Her mother had become the most essential person in her support system, a consistent presence who showed up without being asked, who understood intuitively when Solange needed practical help versus emotional support versus simply someone to sit with her in the quiet. You know, Celestine said one evening, while Solange was at the kitchen table refining her pitch presentation, I think about how scared I was when your father left. I thought I was not going to make it. I thought I did not have what it took. But you did, Solange said. I did. But it took me years to believe I did. You believed it faster. You moved faster. You built something I never had the courage to try. Celestine paused. I am so proud of you. Not because of the salon, though the salon is extraordinary, but because of the woman you became through all of this. Solange made it through 3 rounds of the competition before the regional finals, where 20 finalists would present to a panel of judges and a live audience of business leaders, investors, and community stakeholders. The event was held in Cincinnati, and Solange drove up on a Friday afternoon with Naomi in the back seat, her presentation loaded on her laptop, her pitch memorized cold. Naomi, who was now 6 and old enough to understand that mommy was competing for something important, had insisted on coming. She sat in the audience during the presentations, wearing a dress she had helped pick out and holding a small handmade sign she had decorated with markers that said, "Go, Mommy, go," surrounded by hand-drawn hearts and stars. When Solange walked to the podium to deliver her pitch, she was aware of the judges, of the audience, of the dozens of other entrepreneurs who had made it this far and were watching her with the particular mixture of solidarity and competition that came from being simultaneously on the same team and fighting for the same prize. She was also aware of Naomi in the second row, holding her sign with both hands, her face so full of concentrated hope and pride that Solange had to look away to keep her composure. Solange delivered her pitch in 10 minutes exactly. She talked about the market gap she had identified, the model she had built to address it, the community impact of the business, and her vision for expansion. She was clear, specific, and passionate without being emotional. She answered the judges' questions with the confidence of someone who knew her business inside and out because she had built every piece of it herself. When she sat back down, Naomi climbed into her lap and whispered, "You were perfect, Mommy." Solange did not win. The grant went to a woman from Columbus who had developed an innovative food access program, a decision that Solange later looked up and agreed was probably correct, because the food access work was genuinely extraordinary. But Solange placed second, which came with a $10,000 grant, and more importantly, a connection to the advisory board that would prove transformative. One of the advisory board members, a woman named Evelyn Cross, who had built a regional chain of wellness centers from a single location in Cincinnati, reached out personally after the competition to offer mentorship. Evelyn was in her late 50s, sharp and direct, and unwilling to waste time on pleasantries, and she had identified something in Solange's presentation that she wanted to develop. "You have the operational discipline and the community instinct," Evelyn told her during their first mentorship call. "What you need is the capital strategy and the expansion model. You are ready to grow past one location, Solange. Are you ready to think bigger?" "How much bigger?" Solange asked carefully. 3 locations in 2 years, if you execute correctly and secure the right funding." It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Solange had not allowed herself to think that far ahead, had kept her vision intentionally small to avoid disappointment. But Evelyn's certainty, backed by 3 decades of building real businesses, made the possibility feel less like fantasy and more like a plan. She and Evelyn worked together for 6 months, developing a franchise-ready model for Nourished Roots that could be replicated in new markets. And they identified 2 additional Louisville locations with strong demographics and worked with a small business attorney to establish the proper corporate structure for multi-location ownership. They developed a training program for new stylists and a management system that allowed Solange to maintain quality control across locations. Naomi turned 7 that spring, and Solange threw her a birthday party in the salon after hours. Fairy lights strung everywhere. Naomi's classmates running between the styling chairs, playing elaborate games that involved the salon equipment in ways Solange tried not to think about too carefully. Celestine made Naomi's favorite red velvet cake. Solange's closest friends from the community were there. It was chaotic and loud and perfect. After the party, and when the guests had gone and Naomi was asleep in the back seat on the drive home, Solange drove through the Louisville night and thought about where she was. 7 years ago, she had woken up in a hospital room to find her husband gone, and his absence folded into a note. She had been 31 years old, exhausted and heartbroken, holding a newborn daughter who needed her to be strong enough for both of them. She was 38 now. She owned a successful business that was about to become 3 successful businesses. She had a daughter who was kind and curious and laughed with her whole body. She had her mother, her friends, her mentor, a community of people who genuinely cared about her and her success. She had built a life that was fuller and more meaningful than the one she had imagined back when she was trying to make herself fit into Damon's vision of what their future should look like. She had not thought about Damon in months. That was new. There had been a time when thoughts of him were daily, not romantic thoughts, but the grinding rumination of unanswered questions and unprocessed hurt. Why had he left? How could he leave? Did he ever think about Naomi? Did he feel guilty? Did he feel anything? But grief eventually runs dry. The questions that had once tormented her had simply lost their urgency. She had stopped waiting for his explanations. She had stopped wondering what she could have done differently. She had accepted that Damon's choices were about Damon and had nothing to do with her worth or Naomi's worth, and she had moved on. Or so she thought, until the Saturday morning, 3 weeks after Naomi's birthday party, when she walked into the local office supply store to pick up printer cartridges for the salon and saw Damon Bridges standing at the copy machine. He had not changed as much as she might have expected. He was a little heavier, a little grayer at the temples. He was wearing clothes that suggested he was doing reasonably well financially. He was focused on whatever he was copying and had not yet looked up. Solange stood in the aisle and felt 7 years of carefully constructed distance compress into a single breath. The hurt came back, the anger, the memory of that hospital room, that note, that empty chair. The memory of every night she had spent exhausted and scared and alone with a baby who deserved better than the father she had been born to. And then Naomi, who had been examining a display of colored pens one aisle over, came around the corner and grabbed her mother's hand. "Mommy, can I get these? I need green for my project about—" She stopped, because Solange's hand was stiff in hers, and children are extraordinarily attuned to their parents' bodies. Naomi looked up at her mother's face and followed her gaze to the man at the copy machine. Damon looked up. He saw Solange first, and his expression went through rapid changes. Surprise, recognition. Something complicated that might have been guilt, or might have been calculation, or might have been both. And then he saw the child beside Solange. This 7-year-old girl with his jawline and Solange's eyes and the particular determined set of her mouth that was entirely her own, and Damon Bridges went completely still. "Solange," he said. It came out barely above a whisper. Solange looked at him for a long moment, long enough to take his full measure, to see him as what he actually was, rather than the monster or the ghost she had made him into. He was just a man who had made terrible choices and lived with them or did not, but a man without the power to determine anything about her life or her daughter's life anymore. "Damon," she said. His eyes kept moving to Naomi. "Is she—" "Yes." Solange said simply. Naomi looked between the adults with the perceptive calm of a child who understood that something significant was happening, even if she could not name it. She tightened her grip on her mother's hand. The office supply store was not the place for the conversation that was 7 years overdue, and Solange knew it. She gave Damon her phone number, not because she owed him the opportunity to explain himself, but because she had promised herself that if this day ever came, she would handle it with dignity rather than the righteous anger that was flooding her chest right now. She would not have this conversation in front of Naomi, and she would not let her daughter see her mother come undone in a copy shop. Call me, she said, not for my sake, for hers if you are actually interested. If you are not, then do not. She bought the printer cartridges, let Naomi get the green pens, and walked out into the spring morning with her daughter's hand in hers. In the car, Naomi was quiet for a few minutes and then said, "Was that my daddy?" Solange had answered this question carefully over the years, never lying, never poisoning. "Yes, baby, that was your dad. Why does he not live with us? Because he made some choices when you were born that meant he was not able to be part of our family the way you deserve? That is not about you. That is about him." Naomi considered this. "Is he going to be part of our family now?" "I do not know yet. That depends on him. How would you feel if he wanted to meet you properly?" "I do not know," Naomi said honestly. "Maybe okay, maybe scared." "Both of those feelings make complete sense," Solange said. Damon called that evening. He was clearly nervous, his voice not quite steady, his sentences starting and stopping. He asked if they could meet, just he and Solange first, to talk. Solange agreed, and they arranged a coffee meeting at a neutral location for the following Tuesday while Naomi was at school. She told her mother about the encounter. Celestine's expression was controlled, but Solange could see the anger her mother was managing with deliberate restraint. "You do not owe him anything," Celestine said. "No," Solange agreed, "but Naomi might deserve to know her father if he is capable of being a decent one. And I am not going to let my feelings about what he did prevent her from having that if it is possible." "That is very mature." "It is exhausting," Solange admitted, "but it is right." The coffee meeting was hard in ways Solange had not quite prepared for. Not because she still had feelings for Damon. She did not, she was certain of that. But because sitting across from him brought back the full emotional texture of those years, the hopes she had carried, the specific devastation of finding that note. Damon looked uncomfortable and remorseful in equal measure. He had clearly rehearsed what he wanted to say, and Solange let him say it without interrupting. He talked about the panic attack he had the night Solange went into labor, about the terror of fatherhood that had been building for months and had finally overwhelmed him. He talked about driving away from the hospital, telling himself he would come back once he had calmed down, and then not coming back, and then each day making it harder to come back, and then the paralysis of shame compounding until it was easier to stay gone than to face what he had done. "There is no version of what I did that is acceptable," Damon said finally. "I know that. I know I abandoned you in the worst moment possible. I know I abandoned my child before she even had a chance to know me. I have spent 7 years knowing that and not finding the courage to face it." "Why now?" Solange asked. "Seeing you, seeing her." He paused. "She has my jaw." "Yes. She looks like a person, like a real person." He seemed embarrassed by this statement immediately. "That sounds terrible. I know babies are people, but I think I had convinced myself that I had left behind some abstract concept, not an actual human being who was growing up in the world." "Her name is Naomi," Solange said. "She is in 2nd grade. She loves reading and hates math and is currently obsessed with learning about endangered animals. She is the bravest and funniest person I know. She has thrived, but she has also asked about you, and she deserves honest answers." Damon was quiet for a long moment. "Can I meet her? If you think it is appropriate. I understand if you say no. I understand if you say not yet. I understand if there are conditions." "There are conditions," Solange said. "You commit fully or you do not show up at all. You do not get to meet her and then disappear again when it gets complicated. That is the only thing I will absolutely not allow. If you choose to be in her life, you show up consistently and you do the work. If you are not ready for that, then I need you to be honest with me right now." Damon took a breath. I want to try. I know I do not deserve the chance, but I want to try. They agreed on a path forward. Yet Damon would attend a few sessions with a family therapist before meeting Naomi to ensure he was approaching it with appropriate preparation and clarity about what it would mean for her. Solange would talk to Naomi's therapist, whom she had been seeing for 2 years, to process the questions about her father that naturally arose, to get guidance on how to introduce this in a way that was healthy for Naomi. She drove away from that coffee meeting feeling something she had not expected. Not anger, which she had braced for, and not grief, which she had also anticipated. She felt clarity, clean and final, like a window someone had finally cleaned after years of accumulated grime. Damon's explanations did not excuse what he had done. Nothing would. But they helped her understand that his departure had not been about her inadequacy or Naomi's unworthiness. It had been about his own overwhelming limitations. And understanding that, really understanding it, allowed her to put the last of the weight down. She called Evelyn Cross that evening and told her about the encounter, not for advice, but because Evelyn had become someone she processed significant events with. How are you feeling? Evelyn asked. Honestly, I feel fine. Better than fine. I looked at him sitting across that table and I thought, this man has no idea what he left behind. He missed 7 years of the most extraordinary child. He missed watching me build something real. He left, and we became something magnificent without him. You did, Evelyn said. Sworn I can now you get to decide how much space you want to give him in that magnificent life. Not much, and Solange said. Whatever is right for Naomi, but not much for me. The expansion of Nourished Roots moved forward through that summer. The second location opened in October in the East End neighborhood, with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that drew media coverage and a long waiting list for appointments. The third location was under construction and scheduled to open the following spring. Solange also received news that fall that crystallized the distance she had traveled. She was named to Louisville's annual 40 Under 40 list, a recognition of the city's most impactful young professionals. The profile in the business magazine included her photo, her story, and a quote from Evelyn about Solange's exceptional combination of business discipline and community purpose. The profile described how she had built the salon as a single mother, starting from scratch after a personal setback, growing it through determined execution and community connection into a multi-location enterprise. It mentioned Naomi by name, with Solange's permission, calling her the business's founding inspiration. Solange read the profile and thought, not for the first time, about the version of herself who had sat in that hospital room reading Damon's note, about how impossible a story like this would have seemed to that woman, about how small and devastated and certain she had been in that moment that Damon's departure was the defining catastrophe of her life. It had not been a catastrophe. It had been a catalyst. Naomi met Damon for the first time on a Saturday morning in November at a park near Celestine's house. Solange stayed close but not intrusive, watching from a bench as Damon sat on the grass across from his daughter and clearly had no idea what to say. Naomi, true to form, took the initiative immediately, asking him point blank what his favorite animal was and whether he had ever seen a snow leopard in real life, and did he know that they were endangered. Damon, clearly caught off guard by the directness of her interrogation, laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him. And Naomi, pleased with this response, launched into a detailed explanation of why snow leopards were worth protecting that lasted approximately 15 minutes and required Damon's full attention, which he gave. Solange watched and felt something soften. Not toward Damon exactly, but toward the situation. Naomi was going to be fine. Naomi was already fine. She was this magnificent, forceful, curious person who took up space with confidence, and whatever came of this tentative relationship with her father, she would navigate it on her own terms. That was Solange's work, not keeping Naomi safe from the complicated reality of having an absent father who wanted to make amends, but ensuring Naomi had the strength and self-knowledge to navigate that reality without losing herself. By spring, when the third Nourished Roots location opened, Damon had progressed to monthly visits and was attending Naomi's school events when invited. It was slow and careful and sometimes awkward, but Naomi was handling it with the matter-of-fact pragmatism she brought to most things. She liked him well enough, had told Solange after one visit that he was okay but kind of awkward, which Solange considered an accurate assessment. He was not the father Naomi should have had from the beginning. That time was gone. But he was showing up now, consistently and without drama. And Solange chose to accept that as the best available outcome, rather than resenting it as insufficient compared to what should have been. One evening in April, Solange was closing up the original salon location when she found a card that had been left on the reception desk. She opened it and saw it was from three stylists who had worked for her since the beginning, a note thanking her for creating a workplace where they felt valued and respected and where their professional growth was genuinely supported. She read it standing at the empty reception desk in the quiet closed salon and felt something so warm and full in her chest that it took her a moment to identify it. It was contentment. Not the temporary contentment of a good day or a solved problem, but the deep, enduring contentment of a person who has built something that matches their values, who has surrounded themselves with people who see them clearly, who has created a life that fits. She thought about Damon, not with bitterness, but with something approaching gratitude, not for what he had done, which was inexcusable, but for the inadvertent clarity his departure had brought. She would not have built this, any of this, if she had stayed in the life they were building together. She had poured everything that would have gone into that relationship into her daughter and her business and her community instead. And look what had grown. Naomi's 8th birthday party was held at the original salon location, bigger and louder than the 7th. Celestine baked the red velvet cake again. Evelyn came down from Cincinnati and sat in the corner, looking both delighted and bemused by the chaos of 12 second graders in a hair salon. 3 of Solange's closest friends were there, women who had shown up through every hard year and every good one. And Damon came, awkward and trying, with a birthday present that Naomi opened with polite enthusiasm and an appropriate thank you. At one point in the evening, Solange looked up and saw Damon standing near the window of the salon, watching Naomi demonstrate something to her friends with the particular intensity she brought to all demonstrations, and his expression was one of complicated grief. He was watching what he had missed, feeling the weight of 7 years of absence in a single moment of his daughter's 8th birthday party. Solange did not feel satisfaction at his grief. She felt something closer to compassion, the kind that is possible when you have truly forgiven someone, not for their sake, but because you are no longer willing to carry the weight of not forgiving them. She walked over and stood beside him. "She is remarkable," Damon said quietly. "She is," Solange agreed. "She has always been remarkable, from the moment she was born." Damon was quiet for a moment. "You did that. That is your work." "It is, but she did a lot of it herself. She came into this world with most of what makes her extraordinary already in her." "I am sorry," Damon said. And he meant the 7 years of it, not just the polite social apology, but the real insufficient apology of a man who understood he could never fully account for what he had chosen to miss. "I know," Solange said. "I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you, for me. I could not afford to carry that." She walked away from him and back into the noise and color of her daughter's birthday party, back into the life she had built from the rubble of what he had left her with, back into the fullness of a life chosen rather than inherited. Naomi grabbed her hand when she got close. "Mommy, watch this." And Solange watched, because watching Naomi was her greatest privilege. And nothing, not one moment of the past 8 years, had felt like anything other than exactly the life she was supposed to be living. 2 years later, Nourished Roots had 5 locations across 2 states. Solange was in conversations with a regional investor about a licensing model that could take the concept national. She had been approached to speak at a national small business conference. Evelyn had introduced her to people who were changing the trajectory of everything she was building. She had not gotten here despite Damon leaving. She had gotten here because of what she had become in the space his leaving had created. And that, she had finally understood, was not a sad story. It was the best story she had ever lived.